Huples cat. I would suggest getting this document. It is available online. For all they say that Chernobyl was a wonderful place because of this, it wasn't. The number of species plummeted and has remained low. 4 months after the accident, in the 10-kilometre exclusion zone around Chernobyl, 50 species of birds were found, and they had some rare ones, and they all appeared normal, and they had no dead birds were found. 45 species of mammals from 6 orders were observed, and no unusual appearances or behaviours were noted. Small rodents were all over the spot, and they were highly contaminated. Reabsorption of embryos occurred, and that will occur in human beings. And it talks quite a bit about this, and I think it is kind of frightening. If you're going to eat fish, try not to eat carnivorous fish. The dose rates between carnivorous fish and non-carnivorous fish were incredibly different by a huge order. And the bottom-dwelling fish like goldfish, silver bream, and all of those, and bream and carp, and I guess catfish in parts of the States, had massive irradiation, doses of 10 grays. It talks about various other things, wheat germ and effects on that. So in the affected zones, pine trees bore no seeds for a 5 to 7 year period. Now there was the lethal zone that killed all the pine trees, the sublethal zones that didn't kill them, just damaged them. They had no seeds for 5 to 7 years. So if you're like me and you're relying on seeds for most of your fats in the year 2-3, you might be in for a bit of a surprise. So that's something I'm going to have to look at more and more, is trying to figure this out. I am expecting a nuclear war to have a nuclear winter. So I think one of the things I would do is actually increase my stocks of coconut oil and freeze it outdoors. One of the animal species that's done really well in the exclusion zone of Chernobyl is beaver. Beaver's boomed, so that's good news for us Canucks. However, they keep saying it's probably because of the fact that humans aren't there, rather than any resistance to the radiation. The mere presence of humans in the biosphere causes disturbance, which I think is very true. 20 years later, radiation levels have dropped to 1% of the original level due to radionuclide decay and deeper migration of radionuclides into the soil. 20 years later, the next generation that's born, when they hit adulthood, they're going to be exposed to 1% of the radiation actually dropped in the first few weeks of the nuclear war. It's going to be a long-lasting effect. Let's save the best to last. Assuming we do not as a human species get a lethal dose all across the planet and we all die off, there will be humans left, and humans tend to breed. The major effect that you're going to see in the communities is thyroid cancer in young adolescents, which will be terminal. There will be no chemotherapy or surgery. The other major effect you're going to see is Down syndrome. Down syndrome is strongly correlated to 2 things: background radiation and the age of the mom. I'm guessing people will be breeding very early on, and it will be back to what it used to be. It'll be barefoot and pregnant at 12 and dead at 22. I personally will do my best to struggle against that sort of retrograde behaviour, but I can see why it would happen. So the frequency of Down syndrome in India is 1 in every 1,215 births. The Kerala province, it is 0.93% in every 1,000, so almost 1 in 1,000. They don't know why. Down syndrome increases the age of the mother. So the highest frequency in Kerala province is in women in the age group 30 to 40, whereas 1 in 81. The background radiation in Kerala province is really high from natural causation. In a nuclear war, it's going to be higher. So if you are breeding as a female beyond the age of 30, you will see a really, really high spike in Down syndrome in a society that can't feed itself anyway. What happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was that up to 40% of male birds were totally sterile. No sperm, or just a few dead sperm in their reproductive tracts during the breeding system. Birds and mammals at Chernobyl had cataracts in their eyes and smaller brains. In Chernobyl, all major groups of animals that we surveyed were less abundant in more radioactive areas. All. Birds, butterflies, dragonflies, bees, grasshoppers, spiders, and large and small mammals. All. Wolves showed no effects of radiation whatsoever on their population density. It's because they have fewer competitors. What about Fukushima, right? Leaving aside the strident psychotic nonsense that you see online about Fukushima ending the planet, even though it was a lot less radiation release than there was at Chernobyl. They found, the UN so far has found similar patterns of decreasing abundancy and decreasing diversity in some species and higher abundancy in other. They also found effects in insects and butterflies, and they've also found accumulated mutations over generations. Based on our research and that of others, it is now known that animals living under the full range of stresses in nature are far more sensitive to the effects of radiation than was previously believed. The biological effects of radiation on marine animals will essentially be the same as they are with humans. Both would have the same long-term risks, which is a very slight increase in the risk of cancer. That's talking about Fukushima, not nuclear war. So yeah, this was a totally depressing series, but I think it was an important one. Figure out what you can plant in your area depending on the climate being colder, because it's likely to be in the post-apocalyptic period. Store as much uncontaminated soil as you can and uncontaminated water as you can. Use deep wells rather than shallow wells. Think about what you're taking, where you're taking it from, how much accumulation of radiation is in that area where the animal or plant is growing. Make sure that you have a good and functional Geiger counter, and although they're pricey, that's definitely on my list of things that I need to get. I haven't got one, fair cop. But I actually would like to have one prior to the move to the Shire. I think it's going to be really, really useful. Problem with a lot of Geiger counters is they don't really have a good range. You actually need to know what you're looking at. Is it actually 20 rads an hour, or is it 200? You need to kind of be able to differentiate that in a nuclear war environment. So those radiation counters actually need to be stored away from EMP protection, because a lot of them use transistors. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the series. I really found it kind of depressing again to revisit this again. But with Russia threatening nuclear war over American attempts to try and block what it believes is its legitimate right to protect the massively Russian population of the Crimea, with Israel and Iran glaring at each other, with China getting very, very annoyed at the United States, who knows? This is the one scenario you can't really prep for at the time, and skills-based isn't really going to help you. Nuclear warfare survival, nuclear warfare prepping really demands a scientific and knowledge-based approach. Having the stuff in a book but not having read the book apart from once, just glancing at the pictures, isn't enough. You need to know the knowledge so you can actually function safely. Because remember, in SHTF, tomorrow will always be worse than today, unless you're prepped and then are very lucky to survive. Or maybe you won't be lucky to survive. Doodles. This video has been brought to you by Wolfie Terry Productions 2022.